What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Pack Pride podcast. I'm your host, Cory Smith, here with Michael Clark, football analyst for Pack Pride. Michael, first of all, how are you doing, man?
Doing great. Hope you are.
Before we get things started, I want to remind our listeners, as always, visit our iTunes, Google Play Store, and anywhere you get the podcast to give us a rating if you enjoy the podcast and help get the word out there to the rest of Wolfpack Nation. Also, make sure to check out all of Pack Pride's coverage throughout the football and basketball offseason for $1 for the first month, or get 30% off of Pack Pride and the entire 24/7 Sports Network for 1 year. Head over to packpride.com to find out more about becoming a premium subscriber. Also, have to give a shout out to the Scott Wood home lending team. Is there anything this man can't do? After a successful career at NC State and playing professional basketball, Scott has turned his sights on conquering the mortgage world. Reach out to him today if you're interested in financing the purchase or build of your dream home, looking to purchase your first investment property, or even just to buy land. Great rates in 50 states. Yes, you heard that right. The ability to lend in all 50 states. Scott is looking forward to sending out those pre-approvals and getting your home journey started. All right, Michael. So we're calling these our Pack Pride primers to get you ready for the 2023 season. And with us being 17 days out from the start of the NC State season, I figured there's no better position to start with than the position that Phillip Rivers wore that jersey number at, number 17, quarterback position. Obviously, the big name coming in being Brennan Armstrong, MJ Morris coming back from last season, competing for that spot, and then Lex Thomas as a true freshman coming in this year, and then Ethan Rhodes, Cole Wilson being two more local walk-ons that are with the program too. But just your overall thoughts before we jump into things like on the state of the quarterback position for NC State heading into this season.
I feel good, but I think a little concerned considering you only have 3 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. We know the disaster that was last year. You hope that you don't get to that point where you're playing 4 quarterbacks. Like what Brennan Armstrong brings to the table from an experience standpoint, he's produced. MJ Morris is probably one of the more talented quarterbacks NC State's had on its campus in recent memory. And then Lex Thomas is coming off a labrum surgery last fall. Not 100% yet, in my opinion, but you're hopeful he works his way back to that position. Again, I think when you're talking quarterbacks, though, the goal for NC State this fall would likely to be to play Brennan a lot. MJ, hopefully, maybe you can redshirt. I don't know if that's really a deal breaker, in my opinion, though, because really and truly, can you plan for guys to be on your roster for more than a year or two now? Probably not. And then you definitely would like to redshirt Lex Thomas. So you're hopeful that health, which has not been on NC State's side the past 3 or 4 years, kind of they're due, and especially at the quarterback position would be particularly critical, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, obviously the big name for most people nationally, obviously being Brennan Armstrong. I don't know why I keep saying the word obviously. That's my mistake. But when you look at Brennan Armstrong, 2021 season was phenomenal for him. And you look back at the discussion last year, everybody's kind of debating, ironically enough, who has the better pro potential between him and Devin Leary going into the season. But he had a down season. Devin Leary has the injury that he had. Both of them being at new places now, but Brennan Armstrong heading into the season reunites with Robert Anae, a guy that put up some massive numbers in 2021. I feel like with the discussions we've had, we feel like he's going to kind of meet somewhere in the middle. But what do you feel like are reasonable expectations for him heading into the season?
Well, I think you just hope that maybe he can be one of the better quarterbacks in the league. I think in his situation, it just wouldn't be fair to expect him to have the type of season he did in 2021. State's got to get more out of the running game, and not just him, but other the backs on the roster. I mean, finished near the bottom of the league the past 2 years in rushing. They don't have to be, one of the better rushing attacks in the league, but I think they do need more production there. That would obviously take away some of the pass attempts. In regardless, State's going to throw a lot in this offensive system. I think you just hope that he plays within himself. And to me, the thing for Brennan this fall is the turnovers. State, I don't think, is going to be good enough offensively to overcome those. So you're going to have to really take care of the ball. I think you can't get too down about the interceptions, but at the same time, they're going to have him because he's going to try to make plays. you've got to be smart, pick your spots, and try to just like I said, play within yourself and let your playmakers, because I think there are quite a few, make plays, and it'll be on them to do what the best they can once they have the ball in their hands. But again, I think somewhere in the middle, maybe a little better than in the middle, would probably be a realistic expectation. I just don't know if it's smart to hype him up so much. And I think some people are doing that. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where some people are like, he's who he was last fall, which I don't think he is. So somewhere in the middle, maybe he could emerge as a top 4 or 5 quarterback in the league this fall. I think that would really bode well for NC State.
Yeah, I was going to say our site included in that, not our site specifically, but 24/7 as a whole, kind of putting him outside of the top 50. That has to add a little bit of fuel to the fire for him going into this year. That's obviously not what we believe overall, because I do think, again, I don't know that he's necessarily, the 2021 guy that he was, but I do feel like he deserves a lot more respect given the resume that he's had in the past, right?
Yeah, and again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think what is causing this debate is he was good at Virginia prior to that 2021 season, but it was just such a massive jump in production. And again, I think that is just unreasonable to expect. I think NC State, while I think is going to open up the offense more, I don't think that they're going to be quite as explosive, maybe. And hopefully I'm wrong. But again, I think it's more so about him playing kind of within himself. And I know that's tough when you have the type of playing style he does. But when I'm thinking about Brennan Armstrong, one of the things I'm probably most excited about is what he brings with his legs, being able to extend plays, make plays, pick up first downs. That is something that I think was really lacking. No disrespect to David Leary, just speed running was not his forte. I think that is an element that can really help NC State and really, win some games for him. I think, you can't really defend a quarterback, who can run and who's going to, when he takes off and runs unexpectedly, it really puts a lot of pressure on the defense. And I think that is something Brennan has shown in the past to be really effective. When he was in Charlottesville at Virginia. So that to me may be the biggest thing, just what he brings with his legs. We know he can, make plays with his arms, but I think he just puts so much pressure on defenses, and I think it's something NC State can really benefit from this fall.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of the things that Dave Doran pointed out when he was talking with the ACC Network last week was that element of speed. And he mentioned, he's had guys like Jacoby Brissett at NC State, but never a guy that has that much of elusive speed. Jacoby was a guy that was going to bulldoze you in the run game. Not to say Brennan Armstrong can't do that, but he's a guy that can use an element of elusive.
They don't want that this fall. The last thing they do is need him to get hurt. Whew.
Yeah, exactly. And that again, I think is one of the reasons why you're not going to see him. Look, you're not going to see him be 2020 Brennan Armstrong, where he ran for over 500 yards, I believe, that season. I got the numbers right in front of me. He ran for 552 yards in 9 games, and a big reason for him only playing 9 games is because he was running on the run so much. He got injured, particularly one of those injuries coming from Tanner Ingle, a big hit against NC State in that game. So you'd love to see you know that you need him, how big of a priority he is, and keeping your quarterbacks healthy this year. So I don't know that you're going to see that element of his game nearly as much, but I do think Robert Anae is definitely going to try to utilize everything that he has from Brennan Armstrong, because this is Brennan Armstrong's final season too. Like, if he wants to be able to make it to the next level, he's got to show everything that he has as well. So I'm going back to the numbers again from 2021, those two together, that's the last year that you had. Yes, I know that the numbers seem like a massive spike for 40 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. But at the same time, you look back at what he did in 2020, and again, that was against just ACC competition. So he wasn't facing that 2020 year was a very weird one where, he didn't face anybody outside of the ACC really in that season, and played in only 9 games and still ended up having, the production that he had that season. So I think a lot of people, and I agree with you there. I do think the jump in 2021 was a massive one. And I think the fall last year was huge too. But he said last year, like, he just was not comfortable in that system. And they couldn't find the pieces to make things work. They couldn't figure things out in Tony Elliott's system, not quick enough to be able to compete in the ACC. And I think that was a source of disappointment for him, and one of the main reasons why he looked elsewhere. So I know while everybody keeps saying, I don't think that he's going to be able to replicate those 2021 numbers. Well, I think if he played a full season in 2020 and played, some teams to get prepared for the ACC competition, there's probably a pretty good chance he, at least comes somewhere close to those numbers.
And some of that speculation too is if you just have to think about what NC State has returning from a receiver's perspective.
Yeah,
I think that somebody is going to step up and become a dependable receiver, number one receiver's favorite target, however you want to word it. But it would be irresponsible and to our subscribers to sit here and say this guy's going to have a huge year or everything's going to work out. You can't assume that. The returning production at the receiver position just isn't there. You add a guy like Bradley Reisner, you hope that he can kind of replicate what he did at Rice or maybe even better. But this is a significant step up in competition from what he was playing against at Rice. You also have guys like Terrell Timmons we go down the line who we think are going to be good, but think and projecting is what we're doing. We're not really doing it with hard numbers. So you got Keon Lassane. He's probably a good number three, but you don't have that one or two guys that have really proven themselves at NC State to really look to say, oh, this is going to make his transition easier. Again, I think somebody's going to step up, but we can't sit here and say we think it's going to be okay or this, that, and the other until we see it on the field. Like that's where I'm at with Brennan Armstrong. And that's the reason some of my, not saying the lack of optimism, but just kind of wait and see approach. Who does become the guy or guys for State? Because if they're going to win, Cory, he can't do it all and the defense can't do it all. We saw last year with lack of offense and one of the best defenses in the country, what does that get you? 8 wins. This year, I would venture to say that 8 wins would be a stretch if you don't get better offensive play. So, again, not to get too far off topic.
I was going to say it's not just the offensive pieces, it's the offensive line too, because that was one of the biggest issues last year for Brennan Armstrong. He went from a season where, the numbers were really, really good in 2021. He wasn't sacked nearly as much as he was last year. The guy was sacked over 30 times last season. And talking to Jackie Francilli that, earlier this offseason, one of the big things she said was that, he was constantly looking over his shoulder and trying to figure out how much time he had left because he was sacked 34 times last season. And that's, in only 338 pass attempts. He was sacked 30 times the previous season, but that was in 500 pass attempts. So completely different, sample size there.
And that's another question.
Is that how crucial is that?
That's another question. If we gotta, as good as you can feel about a guy like Anthony Belton, hoping he steps up, left tackle, right tackle, Timothy McKay, and then you like Dylan McMahon. Showed flashes in his limited amount of playing center last year, played it in high school. But there's going to be probably some type of adjustment there if he's going to play center, which is the projection for all 12 games. Guard is where I'm concerned. I think there's some issues there. So there's some kinks to figure out. They've got to find 2 dependable guys who are more than capable and can play consistently well at those 2 guard spots. And I don't think they're there yet. And again, I'm bullish on Brennan. You want him to use his legs, but you don't want that to be an every other play deal. And I think right now, one of the bigger questions for NC State is who's going to play guard for us. We know Lyndon Cooper put out on social media some type of injury. We're not going to speculate on that. But even if he is healthy and ready to go, those competitions, in my opinion, really need to continue all the way until the opener.
Yeah, because again, like you said, you do have the legs as an option, but you don't.
Want him to use it every down, and I just think that there are some significant questions at that guard spots right now.
Yeah, and looking at obviously the other quarterbacks on the roster, MJ Morris. I know, if you log on to social media at any given time, you'll see people that are still pushing for MJ Morris to be the guy, and look, rightfully so. MJ Morris. At last season, the type of numbers that he put up when he was thrust into that position, the way that he played under pressure last season, I'm not going to say, okay, one is the clear-cut guy here, but if you look at what Brennan Armstrong has done in this offense, you look at the familiarity that he has, and you look at what MJ Morris, the things we were hearing out of spring, obviously the first few weeks, he was struggling to kind of get things, from that offense. And then he played well down the stretch, but it sounded like,
outplayed Brennan in the spring game. If we're really being honest, I believe he was the better quarterback of the two that day.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and that's the thing is I feel like there is a case to be made there, but at the same time, how big of an opportunity is this for MJ Morris to be able to truly learn the system, to be able to, learn under Robert Anae, but also see a guy like Brennan Armstrong who has played in the system and be able to pick his brain on a constant basis, as opposed to Robert Anae coming in and him just having to be the guy somehow.
It's definitely a significant. I think people lose track after a kid starts playing or plays a couple games how old they are. And in MJ's situation, was playing as an 18-year-old freshman last year. Has only been on campus, Cory, because if you look back, he didn't enroll early, so he has not been at NC State that long, which makes what we did last year even more remarkable. From a talent standpoint, upside, physical, he's the most talented quarterback I think on the roster by a significant amount, in my opinion, as far as the upside there. I think MJ, again, I said it, is one of the more talented quarterbacks they've had on campus in quite some time. You would like for this year to be a good development year for him, but I'm not generating quarterback controversy. I'm just saying if Brennan Armstrong plays like he did last year, regardless if it's all his fault or not, you'll see MJ Morris playing. So I'm not saying look over his shoulder because he's the starter. I'm just telling that I think MJ is more than capable of especially as time goes on and he continues to get colorless offense, of coming in if NC State if he has to play, he's more than capable to come in and help this team win games. So again, it's kind of a delicate balance. Some of the amount that you like your red shirt in a perfect world, I guess that's the case, but I think we're both of the belief now, can you really plan 2 years from now in any college football program? It's kind of a year-to-year deal right now. But I think, the future is extremely bright for MJ. They were fortunate. A lot of whispers that if he would have gone in the portal this past year, they would have had a ton of suitors. I think that's an understatement. Able to keep him on the roster. Now you just hope he can be patient and just continue to develop. But at the end of the day, who's to say he doesn't play this year? I think it's a wait and see deal.
Yeah, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but Brennan was asked about that at ACC kickoff, and he kind of said, he's like, man, look, MJ is an extremely talented quarterback, and his time is coming. Like, he's going to be the guy. And Brennan was like, but like, just let me have my last year, and then we'll look at that. So, but
he just has to, all he's got to do is play well. That's it.
Exactly. But speaking of MJ, I do want to go through all the quarterbacks. I mean, you look at the things that he did last year, and obviously, if you were just to look at it purely based on the overall stats, like, just over 60% completion percentage, a 30, if you're going by ESPN's rankings, a 38.1 QBR is what I see here in front of me. But you look at what he did in his his one true start against Wake Forest, and then against Virginia Tech when he came in and basically took over that game and ended up leading NC State to a win, along with, the sample size that we saw against Boston College, where he was basically only fully healthy for a half in that one. There was not to speculate and say, oh, NC State purposely played him with an injury, but knowing now what we know, he suffered a bit of that injury, at the end of the first half, and then played the second half unknowingly with that injury. He didn't say anything at the time, so this is what we can go off of. You look back at last year, I mean, the only interception he threw all season long was in that game, that Boston College game. He played 2 basically full games against Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and ended up passing for over 64% in both of those games, passed for 6 total touchdowns in those games, and rushed for over 50 yards combined between the two. So overall, I mean, I know you just went through and said you feel like he's one of the most talented quarterbacks on the roster, but what do you feel like the future looks like for MJ Morris?
I think he can be as good as he wants to be. Again, whether who knows the time frame. I think the approach is that next year is it. You just mentioned Brennan hopefully playing well this year. I think what it does do is if it's forced into action or they choose to play him, I think you feel really good about what you have in him. And there's very few teams, I think, around the country who would be as comfortable playing their backup quarterback per se as NC State would. I mean, physically, again, just love what he brings to the table, love his mental makeup. I think everything that we hear is the guys love playing with Brennan. They also really like MJ. So it has created some friendly competition, but at the same time, MJ is chomping at the bit to get on the field in some role. I would suspect early in the year, you probably try to get him in the game. Maybe not as often as possible, but you do want him to have some snaps because we have seen NC State be decimated by injuries at quarterback. And again, his injury last year was just if we're being transparent, was an awful call, using him essentially as a battering ram on a quarterback keeper, and was it a cheap shot? Obviously was. But still, you don't, in my opinion, ever put your quarterback in that position, especially an 18-year-old kid who's been on campus for 4 months. So I like MJ. Again, I think he's got a chance to be really, really good. This is a big season for his development, and I think that's the key word. Let him develop. But don't be surprised if you see him on the field.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was going to say is he does have that dual threat ability to not, he's more of a pocket passer, more of a guy that can move when he needs to. But, we saw on some design plays last season, especially, running the football. He did have that one touchdown against BC before the injury, where he actually ran out on I believe, if I remember correctly, it was zone read. So he just kind of, goes with the fake handoff, runs it around, and gets to the outside and gets that touchdown. I mean, if you're looking at it, do you feel like he has a good fit in this offense as well, where he can be a guy not only that can pass the football but can run it too? If you're not using him, like you said, as a battering ram or trying to use him as for QB sneak purposes.
Yeah, I think he's going to be really successful in whatever offense he is. I think the thing about MJ is, first of all, the talent pops, but he's coachable. He's handled this situation well. He's mature beyond his years. He's a likable guy. He's going to work hard. And I think that, he's got a chance to, like I said, be really, really good down the road. And, again, if he was forced into action this year, I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, I think he would be ready to play. I do think there is still, some growing pains with the new offense. This is completely, I'll say, opposite of what Tim Beck was doing, but it is significantly different. So to go from an offense that, MJ was probably studying as a senior in high school towards the end because he knew he was coming to NC State, to be super familiar, to have that completely switched after being on campus for half a year is a significant change. So he probably needs a little bit more time. But again, I feel like he's going to learn quickly and just continue to progress. So I think State's in a really good spot. And Coach Doran on all media platforms, whenever he's talked about how excited he is about MJ, and I genuinely believe it. I mean, the tape pops, the physical things are there, the mental makeup, it's all there for MJ Morris.
And lastly, I mean, we talked about, the factor of having Lex Thomas on the roster, but again, like you said, probably not being at 100%. When do you feel like he might be 100% if that situation were to arise? We sat here and talked on the podcast last year of, a break in case of emergency with, having multiple quarterbacks on the roster, but feeling really only good about one last year. Where do you feel like things are if you were to have to get down that line, and at what point a guy like Lex Thomas might be ready for that spot?
Yeah, I think you would hope it would be soon that he would really be ready to roll. And I think it will be. You just hope and your fingers crossed that you're not put in that situation. He's a guy that, only got really 1 year of starting experience as a varsity quarterback and then was hurt kind of early to midway through his senior season. I like what Lex is a player. I think he's got a chance to be a good football player at NC State. But I think the worst thing you can do is try to put a kid out there before they're ready. And I think just this injury in general, labrum injuries are tough regardless of your age. I think it's going to take a little time. But I think we're at the point where sooner or later, it's going to be – everything's going to be where it needs to be. But I just don't think that is an ideal situation. If you're an NC State fan, you want him to redshirt, get stronger, learn the offense, and just continue to progress.
All right. Well, I think that'll just about wrap everything up for this edition of the Pack Pride Primers. Michael, thank you so much for jumping on, man. We'll be back here in just a second. We're going to be recording these straight through, but we'll have the running back position coming out next. So I appreciate you for jumping on, man.
Thanks, Cory.
All right, guys. Well, again, thank you for everybody for listening. We will talk to you again soon.